Heinrich Müller was the cold, calculating chief of the Gestapo, the most feared man in the Third Reich, known as Gestapo. Müller. He was a professional policeman who rose to power by being indispensable to the Nazi elite. Unlike many of his colleagues, he was a shadowy figure who avoided the spotlight, preferring to operate from the dark heart of the RSHA in Berlin. As April 1945 bled into May, the Soviet Red Army tightened its iron grip around Berlin. The city was a crumbling ruin of fire and ash. Inside the Vorbunker, the atmosphere was one of suicidal desperation. Müller was one of the last high-ranking Nazis seen alive in the bunker, his cold eyes watching the collapse of the empire he had helped build with blood. On May 1, 1945, the day after Hitler's suicide, Müller was seen by several witnesses, including Hans Bohr, Hitler's pilot. Müller reportedly refused to join the mass breakout from the bunker. He was last seen standing calmly in the ruins, stating, "We know the Russian methods exactly. I haven't the slightest intention of being taken prisoner by the Russians." When the smoke cleared and the Red Army fully occupied the bunker complex, Müller was nowhere to be found. He didn't leave a body, a suicide note, or a trail. While other high-ranking Nazis were captured or found dead, the head of the Gestapo simply evaporated into the chaos of the fallen city. The hunt for the world's most wanted policeman began in earnest. In August 1945, a body in a general's uniform was found in a shallow grave near the Reich Aviation Ministry. It bore Müller's identity papers. He was buried in a Jewish cemetery in Berlin-Mitte. For a time, the world believed the Gestapo chief was dead, his reign of terror buried under the rubble of his own headquarters. The case seemed closed. Years later, investigators reopened the grave only to find a shocking discovery. The bones didn't match Müller's age or physical description. There were actually 3 bodies in the grave, none of which were him. The identity papers had been a plant. It became clear that Gestapo Müller had staged his own death to facilitate a clean escape from the Allied noose. Cold War tensions birthed a new theory: Müller had defected to the Soviet Union. As a former anti-communist specialist, his knowledge of Soviet networks was unparalleled. Rumors suggested the NKVD had snatched him from the bunker to utilize his talents in the new Eastern Bloc. To the west, a Müller working for Moscow was a terrifying prospect. The CIA and West German intelligence spent decades chasing ghost sightings. Reports placed him in Moscow, Prague, and even East Berlin. They feared he was training the Stasi, the East German secret police, using his Gestapo blueprints to build a new era of surveillance. Every lead turned into a dead end, as if he were a ghost haunting the Iron Curtain. Like Eichmann and Mengele, many believed Müller had used the Ratlins to flee to South America. Rumors placed him in Argentina, living under a false name among the expatriate Nazi community. Mossad agents combed through the jungles and cities, looking for the man who had helped organize the Holocaust, but the trail remained cold and silent. In the 1960s, a sensational report suggested Müller was living in Panama as a wealthy businessman. Informants claimed he had traded Nazi gold for a new life of luxury. Intelligence agencies swarmed the region, but once again, the Gestapo chief proved to be a phantom. If he was there, he was a master of disguise and total anonymity. When Adolf Eichmann was captured in 1960, the world held its breath. Surely the man who managed the logistics of the final solution knew where his boss, Müller, was hiding. But Eichmann claimed he hadn't seen Müller since the final days in Berlin. The silence from the Jerusalem courtroom only deepened the mystery of Müller's ultimate fate. In West Germany, Müller's family remained under constant surveillance. Authorities hoped he would eventually reach out to his wife or children. Letters were intercepted and phones were tapped for decades, yet no contact was ever made. Either Müller was dead, or he was cold enough to abandon his own flesh and blood forever to ensure his survival. A darker theory emerged in the 1990s: Müller had been recruited by the Americans. Under Operation Paperclip, the US brought many Nazi scientists over. Some wondered if Müller had been given a new identity in the US to help fight the Cold War. It was a scandalous thought that the Gestapo chief could be living a quiet life in an American suburb. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the Stasi archives were opened. Historians searched desperately for any mention of Müller. While they found evidence of other Nazis working for the East, Müller remained a void. It seemed he hadn't been a puppet of the East after all. The mystery shifted back to the chaotic streets of 1945 Berlin. For Mossad, Müller was a high-priority target alongside Martin Bormann. They believed that as long as no body was found, he was alive. Their files on him grew thick with sightings from every corner of the globe. They interviewed former Nazis in hiding. But even among the old comrades, Müller was regarded as a man who had successfully vanished. In the 2000s, historians revisited the 1945 dental records and physical descriptions. They compared them to every John Doe found in Berlin that year. The problem was the lack of DNA technology at the time of the original burials. The fog of war had allowed for a perfect disappearance, leaving only contradictory paperwork and fading memories. In 2013, Johannes Tuchel, a leading German historian, claimed to have solved the riddle. He presented documents suggesting Müller had indeed died in 1945. According to his research, Müller was killed during the final battle and buried in a mass grave in a Jewish cemetery. The previous empty grave was simply a result of the chaotic post-war burial process. Tuchel's findings were met with immediate skepticism. If Müller was buried in a mass grave, why was his body never positively identified by DNA? Skeptics argued that a man as clever as Müller would easily use the chaos of a mass grave to die on paper while slipping away in a different uniform. The lack of a verified body left the door open. Those who knew Müller described him as a man without ideology, a technocrat of death. He wasn't a fanatic who would die for Hitler. He was a survivor who understood how to navigate power. This personality trait strongly suggested he would have planned an exit strategy long before the Russians reached the bunker walls. As the 21st century progressed, the likelihood of finding Müller alive vanished. Born in 1900, he would be long dead of natural causes. The search transitioned from a manhunt to a historical forensic investigation. The goal was no longer justice, but the truth of how one of history's greatest criminals avoided the gallows. Some researchers focused on the Nazi gold theory. Müller, as head of the Gestapo, had access to confiscated wealth. It is theorized he used these spoils to buy his way out of Berlin, paying off guards and securing passage to a neutral country. In this scenario, he lived out his days in quiet, wealthy obscurity, far from the reach of any law. Müller's disappearance remains the most significant unsolved mystery of the Third Reich's leadership. Unlike Himmler's suicide or Goebbels' suicide, Müller left no closure. He remains the shadow in the bunker, the man who walked into the fire and never walked out, leaving a void where a monster should have been. The name Heinrich. Müller became synonymous with the perfect escape. His story fueled countless novels and conspiracy theories, representing the lingering fear that the architects of the Holocaust had escaped punishment. He became a ghost that haunted the conscience of the post-war world, a reminder of the failures of international justice. To this day, the German government officially considers him dead in 1945. But without a body, the official status is more of a legal convenience than a proven fact. Most historians agree he likely perished in the ruins of Berlin. But the how and where remain lost to history, buried under decades of misinformation and ruin. Whether he died in a ditch in Berlin or lived a long life in the shadows, Heinrich Müller achieved his final goal. He escaped the judgment of man. The chief of the Gestapo remains a mystery, a dark smudge on the pages of history that refuses to be erased. He is the man who oversaw millions of deaths and then quietly vanished himself.